Tara Bentley, and I'm the Executive Director for the Indiana Association of Home Educators, otherwise known as the IAHE.
Hi, I'm Cindy Briggs. I'm a homeschool mom and a volunteer with IAHE.
We're here bringing you this podcast to share with you a lot of great information about homeschooling here in Indiana. This will be a place to learn about homeschooling, find the support you need, all in the Hoosier State.
Each week, we're going to focus on a different topic in the homeschool world. We'll bring you special guests and information that's going to help you on your homeschool journey. So let's get started.
Hi, everyone. Tara Bentley here. We are recording this podcast kind of last minute. It is actually Tuesday, May 21st while we're recording, and Cindy is not with me today. We keep missing each other, but we're having a lot of fun bringing on and having great conversations with more of our Indiana friends. So with me today, a returning guest, Kylene Varner. Kylene serves on our government affairs team on the board for IAHE Action, our sister organization, and you're going to hear a lot more about what she does. So welcome, Kylene. I'm glad you're here today.
Hey, Tara. Hey, everybody listening.
So we're going to have a conversation today. It might be a little longer than most of our podcasts, but it's a pretty darn important one. And we're going to talk about homeschool diplomas. So I really encourage you to stick with us and hear all the way to the end, because it's an important topic. It's certainly the questions that we get. Obviously, we focus on a lot of getting started questions that we answer for families, but we get a ton of questions about homeschool diplomas. And because what we find is that parents run to Google. They think Google is their friend, and they walk away even more confused than when they were thinking they were on their own. So questions that start with who gives the student the diploma? Are homeschool diplomas legal? Do colleges and universities accept them? And what about the military? So there's a lot of variations on these questions, and we're going to talk about real answers, the kind of how things have shifted since COVID. And then we're going to give you the history of some unique situations that the IHE has dealt with. And then we're going to talk about, is there a legislative solution and do we like it? So stick with us for this conversation. It's going to be a good one. So I spewed a lot of questions out, Kylene. Where do you want to start?
Sure. So I'll actually start by telling you, I am sitting outside on my front porch. It's a lovely May day. So if you hear birds chirping and all the things, know that I am outside in a peaceful, serene setting, because this is a topic that makes my blood pressure go through the roof. So I figured that anything I could do to assist myself with being calm would be lovely. So if you hear the outside in nature, yes, I'm outside. Even if you're listening to this in the dead of winter, I hope that the outside sounds are calming to you as well as we discuss this really difficult topic.
I think that's a great idea. So let's start with a simple one. Who gives the diploma to a student?
That's a great question. And it's one that we get often, especially from parents who are just starting their homeschool journey. And there's really not a certain group of parents who ask this other than the ones who start their homeschool journey. So we get this question from parents who have 3-year-olds, all the way to parents who are withdrawing their students from a brick and mortar school, be it a public school or a private school, and they're coming home to homeschool. So we see this from all the parents, with the only commonality being that they're starting homeschooling. And in Indiana, it's really important to know what our classification of homeschoolers are. Now, I say it's important because that classification varies state by state. So want to be really clear, we're talking about Indiana here. So if you're listening from another state, welcome, we love you, hang on, because these are important things to discuss, but just know that this is specific to Indiana. So in Indiana, homeschoolers are classified as non-accredited, non-public schools with less than one employee. And that distinction is super important because as legislation continues to come forward, we're seeing a lot of bills that discuss non-accredited, non-public with at least one employee. And those tend to be like your parochial schools that aren't accredited through the state. So for years, we were just under the umbrella of non-accredited, non-public. We are still, but in many circumstances now, that distinction is really important. So in Indiana, non-accredited, non-public schools award the student the diploma. So in the case of homeschoolers, We parents determine what the path is for our child's graduation. We determine when our child has met the criteria for our graduation, and we issue the diploma. And I think this is really an important sticking point because I've had so many employment agencies and colleges say, well, a parent can't just put their name on a diploma and print it out at their home computer. And my response is always, well, why not? Why
Right.
not? Why can't they do that?
Exactly. So I think that so let's talk about, I want to highlight two things that you said. Well, one thing that you
Sure,
said, one situation that we know happens somewhat frequently. So let's go back to
sure.
the less than one employee piece. And I do
Mhm.
want to make it clear, the law did not change, because we have a
Correct.
lot of people who have been homeschooling for a long time and they've never heard that. And so they kind of question when they start hearing it. And the reason that you now hear it is because it is how legislators have chosen to bring clarity to laws recently over, I don't know, let's say five,
Absolutely.
6, 7, 8 years. That is how they have chosen to exclude us from things that could have unintended consequences. So homeschool
Yes,
law did not change, but that
correct.
little itty bitty piece of clarification has saved us. So
Yes.
keep that in mind. And I would say when we're making it very clear, the parent is issuing the diploma. One thing that often happens, and I say often, maybe once or twice a year, we will have a graduate who may be 30, 40 years old, and they will contact us, and they participated in a large graduation ceremony.
Hmm.
IHE used to hold a statewide graduation. We have another group that does it now here in the state. And sometimes families participate in that graduation. And to the graduate who's 18 at the time, has now gone on to live a lot of life, they think someone else handed them the diploma.
Right.
So they think that perhaps we have a copy of it because maybe they didn't keep
Correct.
a copy, mom and dad didn't keep a copy, parents have passed away. There's just all kinds of situations that happen. And so we will occasionally get calls from those people or anyone like that who want to say, but someone handed it to me. So they think
Yes.
that an organization handed it to them. Or I've even had one person say, well, a government official gave it to me.
Yeah.
Well, if your organizer brought a special guest and put them on stage, that's all they did. They just
Yeah.
passed it, but it was still issued by the parents.
Absolutely. And I think that that is a really important distinction. I'm very glad that you made it because as parents and as administrators of our homeschools, we have a responsibility and a duty to our students to ensure that they have all the documentation they need, not only for now, but whatever their future endeavor looks like. So even if you have a child who you feel like is not college bound, they feel like they're not college bound, only the Lord knows what their intent is in the future, right? Are they going to go back to school when they're 40? I don't know. I'm 45 and I'm a lifelong student. I could be in school for the rest of my life and I would be thrilled.
With
But
you.
yeah, I just love learning. I'm taking a Koine Greek class right now and it's delightful. Language acquisition is not my forte, but it's just really fun learning and not having the pressure of this is going to impact my future career.
Right.
It's really it's lovely on this side of it. But I think sometimes there is a little bit of complacency within the homeschool community to say, well, my child isn't college bound, so I don't need to worry about this or I don't need to worry about that. And this is just a gentle and friendly reminder that we do have a duty to our children to make sure that they have everything they need documentation wise going forward. And as homeschoolers, we want to, place in our children this love of learning, this ability to learn on your own. So perhaps content isn't completely your focus. I understand that. But we have been contacted numerous times with older adults saying, my mom passed away. I need a copy of my diploma or I need a copy of my transcripts. My dad passed away. I cannot express how really heartbreaking it is to have an adult who has come and said, yes, I did all these things, but my parents didn't give me the documentation I needed. So, parents, I really want to encourage you put that thing on a jump drive, put it on a CD, put it on Google Drive, put it in Dropbox, make 500 copies, put it in their safety deposit box, whatever you got to do. Make sure they have all the documentation they need going forward.
And even if they've gone on to college and received a college
Yes.
diploma, went on and got their
Yes.
master's, and they have a master's degree, like whatever it is, there are still rare occurrences
Yes.
who someone shows up and they even have a college degree, and someone still says, but your high school diploma, which is
Right.
like it mind-boggling. But it happens. So keep that
Yes,
in
it
mind.
does.
So,
Yes.
we're pretty much answering the question, are they legal? Do colleges and universities accept them? So what do you say about that?
Sure. So homeschool diplomas are 100% legal. The issue becomes that we don't have it written in code that diplomas from non-accredited, non-public schools are legal. That's not in the state code. And to be clear, we're talking about those brick and mortar parochial schools that aren't accredited and homeschoolers, and we use that kind of umbrella, non-accredited, non-public school term. But then also the word homeschool never appears in Indiana code. So there's not even a homeschools are non-accredited, non-public, less than one employee, parents lead homeschools. Indiana code has purposely been left ambiguous because we don't want to take away the rights of the parents to direct their child's education. You might be hearing there's some sirens going on. Our road is parallel to the main road. So Tara is shaking her head no. That was a combination of siren and Tara shaking her head no. So I'm glad you all can't hear that. So, there is beauty in the code being ambiguous in that way, so that if, let's say there is a traumatic event within the family, mom or dad has an illness that they're not able to instruct their children, grandma or grandpa or aunt or uncle or your neighbor can step in if they're not being paid, right? Because then they switch categories. They can step in to fill that gap. So Indiana homeschool parents have retained those rights. And so, we'll talk a little bit later about unintended consequences of legislation, but I want all parents to know that yes, homeschool diplomas are legal. Yes, colleges and universities do accept them. We do have the rare occasion where we have an out-of-state college that says, well, I need something from the Homeschool Association that says that yes, they issued, meaning the Homeschool Association issued the diploma. And I'll tell you that usually within 24 hours, we have that resolved. We're able to point them to Indiana code and say, I understand what you're asking for, but there's no legal way for you to receive that here in Indiana. And it's just simply because homeschool law varies so much by state. The laws are so different. And so those out of state colleges, they're really only familiar with their state's law to the best of their ability.
Right. And I think that is really important to highlight, that most of the time, this is a matter of misunderstanding. So if
Yes.
your student applies somewhere and you're being told no, we're always going to default to the position of they just don't understand. So give us a
Correct.
chance to help them understand. And what you said, within 24 hours, we, the IAHE, and Kylene, you have such an amazing track record of dealing with colleges and universities. When we find out that someone has misinformation, we are on it. So
Absolutely.
we'll talk to admissions officers. Now, we're saying that she needs to calm down. So don't everybody flood her with information for calls or requests, because it is what we do. She's still a homeschooling mama, so it's
Absolutely.
time. So let's protect her. Let's protect her. We want to keep her here. But excellent track record of reaching out to colleges, universities, out of state people who they just don't understand Indiana law. And that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we give them the benefit of the doubt. Most of the time, they really do want your student. They just don't understand how to check a box. We talk about Indiana being one of the freest states in the country. So what that means is, if your student does go someplace else, they know what their law requires, and maybe they have something a little bit more formal. Doesn't mean that they're not going to get in 99.999% of the time. So I just,
right
in that. So let's, what about the military?
Sure. And just to step back just a minute, one of the questions I often get when I'm assisting a family with a situation, and so oftentimes, it's a parent reaching out, and they're saying, my kid was homeschooled and this is what's happened. This is what the college or the university is telling them. And if it's an instance where the child is now an adult, we bring the child in on that as well, because I really need the child's permission, who is really an adult at this point. I need their permission to talk with their parent as well. And one of the first questions I get is, do I have to be a member for you to help me? And my answer is always no. I've not asked you about membership. This is a service that we provide free of charge to our families here in Indiana, because we want homeschooling to remain free. And we want parents to continue to be confident in their ability to educate their children and direct the education of their children here in the state, free of additional oversight in the form of legislation and whatever unintended consequences come. So just know that if you do need help, first of all, as Tara mentioned, homeschooling mom of three, I'm a volunteer. I don't get paid to do this. I do it as a service to our Indiana homeschoolers, and the IAHE does it as a service to our Indiana homeschoolers, because we are passionate about your parental rights being upheld and your student getting the opportunity that he or she needs or wants. So go ahead, Tara. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I'll say absolutely 100%. We are so grateful for you. You can still be a member. We still need your membership.
Yes, we still want your membership, but we don't require
it. Or a donation would be great, and volunteers are even greater. So let's just your little advertisement right there.
Yeah.
How you
Of course, yes. I'm not saying don't become a member. I'm just saying we're not going to require you to pay us to reach out to these people on your behalf. Yes.
There you go.
So great question about the military. And I'll say, in terms of service to the organization, I'm relatively new to serving within the IHE and this role of reaching out to different organizations and employers. And only twice in just my couple of years have I had a military situation where a recruiter stated that a homeschooling diploma was not legal, that the student was going to have to go and get the HSE, which is the replacement for the GED. And so oftentimes what we have is a brand new recruiter who doesn't, again, understand Indiana homeschool law. And I'm able to send them a lot of documentation. In the 1990s, I know we're talking about the 1900s now, so some of our parents may be like, oh my goodness, that was so long ago. I promise you it wasn't. So in the 1990s, the military came out and made a very strong statement. We like homeschoolers, we take homeschoolers, there's no issue. So oftentimes it's just a matter of educating the recruiter, and the recruiter says something to the effect of, I really want this candidate, I really want them in this role. What can we do to make sure that they're legally here? And so I'm able to share this documentation, and the student is able to go on. I want to make sure that I'm clear about this. We're not talking about just kids who haven't graduated yet or brand new grads. This can go all the way up to 24-year-olds plus who are joining the military. And now suddenly you've got this adult who's gone on to college in many cases. They've gone on to work in law enforcement. They're out in the world with a career. And the military recruiter is saying, no, sorry, your diploma is not legal. And so now you have mom who is, well out of the homeschooling era. She's trying to help her child. We're compassionate towards that. We're empathetic towards that. We understand that. So I'm really glad to say that our U.S. military has, I believe, really come a long way in the last few years. We're seeing them at conventions, at our own homeschool career fair night, college and career fair. It was really great to see the representation there. And so I think I'm really pleased with the amount of internal education even that's going on amongst the recruiters.
Yeah. And I was going to say the same thing about our first ever college and career fair that we held in March. And overwhelmingly, the military was there. The colleges and universities were there. We had trade schools there. So we just say, rest assured about a fear, if you're jumping into homeschooling, the fear, they want your student. So
absolutely.
Now let's talk about some real situations and things that we have helped fight for families on. But let's talk about the impact of COVID and how that kind of impacted things, because people did jump into homeschooling near the end of high school. It has created some rough situations. It has created some admissions officers who that's what they're seeing. They're seeing kind of like this fraudulent use of the term homeschooling for students who weren't really homeschooled.
Right. And I think that's really important too. Some people get a little upset with us because we stick to the lines of definitions. And the reality is definitions matter. And it's okay if that upsets you. I understand that. I'm not immune to that. But it is incredibly vital that you as a parent understand what laws and policies and procedures you and your student are held to. It's vital. So, for example, if I'm in a virtual public school, so a lot of our schools during COVID, they transitioned to a virtual learning environment. And a lot of people said, oh my goodness, now I'm homeschooling. I don't know how you parents do it. We saw really awful memes being circulated. I saw a meme of a mom typing at a keyboard and her child is behind her. And it's, looks like maybe a 10-year-old is laid out on the floor and duct taped to the floor. And it's like, hey, this is how homeschooling is going. And while I understand that that meme really felt funny to those parents who were suddenly working from home and trying to conduct their child's online learning, and a lot of debacles were going on with that online learning, Wi-Fi systems weren't capable of handling that kind of load and whatnot. I understand that that's funny to them, but for those of us who are in the trenches homeschooling our children, that is not funny, because if we actually did that, that's abuse and neglect. We cannot do that.
Right. Absolutely.
And so, we saw a lot of these things coming out of COVID. A lot of parents had a front row seat to what their children were learning, and they weren't pleased with that. And so they took the leap, and literally it was a leap of faith saying, we don't want this. And so they came to homeschooling. And in some cases, they were truly homeschooling. In other cases, they were misled to be in programs that called themselves homeschooling, but they really weren't. So again, virtual public programs, different things like that. And especially with COVID, we have the advancement of what we now term educational entrepreneurship, right? Which are really businesses that are more interested in getting access to that state funding than what they really are about if there's education going on with your child. And especially in states like Indiana, we know that the state budget, over 55% of the state budget is dedicated to education funding. There's a lot of money to be made in that space. So I just want to encourage any parent who is considering educating your child at home, please make sure you know where your student is enrolled and what the expectations are for you. Know that at the IAHE, our heart's desire is that you would homeschool your children, that you would love being with them, and you would cherish these very short number of years that you have with them. And we want to share what the expectations are for you in terms of what the law requires of you. If you're not yet fully homeschooling your children and bearing that responsibility, and I know it can feel overwhelming sometimes, know that we are here for you. Our desire is that you would see the beauty of homeschooling. But again, there's a lot of fraud that came out of COVID. We've gotten some feedback about diploma mills and, kids saying that they're enrolled in a program, they get a diploma. That's not something we can change. Adding a definition of homeschooling in the state will not change that. Getting a state diploma will not change that. A state awarded diploma doesn't change that. In politics, we refer to that as bad actors. There are bad actors in every industry, every single one. So we will always operate with the assumption that a parent is acting with integrity, that they have, in fact, carried out a program of their choosing, be it that they went with a box curriculum or they've kind of, developed their own and set that education for their own child. We will always assume that the parent has acted with integrity. So just know there's no change that can be made to stop people from acting without integrity.
Right. And we really, obviously, we're pro homeschooling. Let's make that clear.
We are.
We're very pro homeschooling. And we want to set you up for success if this is something that you have an interest in. And there are certainly situations where parents realize late into their students' high school years that the school is not working. But I really want to caution people that when you reach your student's senior year, you really want to take it seriously. If your child has been in the public school this long, if you're at the beginning of your senior year, yes, homeschooling for the end may help you tremendously. you need wise counsel to make that decision. But even
Absolutely.
this year, we had someone pop into our discussion group, and this was May,
Yeah.
and of finishing their senior year, and parents said, I just don't think my student's going to make it through this one class or one project. Can't I just withdraw them and give them a homeschool diploma because I've said enough is enough?
Right.
Is not wise. That is not a
Correct.
fair use of our freedom that we have. And so in that situation, those kinds of situations, they do happen, and college admissions advisors sometimes see these situations. So they are seeing so-called homeschool diplomas
Absolutely.
they know are not from homeschooling families. So we understand why the
Correct.
caution is there, why the caution is growing. That's why our work continues.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned that. It is absolutely true. In that particular situation, we advised that person, no, you should not take the child out of school with 2 weeks remaining for the senior year and call them homeschooled because you haven't actually homeschooled them. The whole premise is my child is not doing well in this class or not doing well in this project. This is not a matter of homeschooling. You can do hard things. Homeschoolers do hard things. We have kids who don't get straight A's because they're homeschooling and they're working on the projects and they're doing things. Homeschooling is not a scapegoat. It is not the easy outdoor. Homeschooling is a commitment. And yes, like you mentioned, there are parents who they see that their child is not doing well going into senior year, and they say, is it too late? No, it is not too late. And I know we might feel like we're kind of talking out of both sides of our face here to say, no, it's not too late. But we have to look at the intent, and exiting the system 2 weeks before the end of graduation, it is not operating with integrity. It's just not.
Right. Absolutely. And so now, only other thing I'm going to say on this topic in that situation is, however, if your student is in an unsafe environment, like if we're talking about
Yes.
something that's bigger than academics, like do the hard thing. But when you're talking
Yes.
about bullying or anything else, which we know is rampant, you're talking about your child's mental health,
Right.
pull them out. Like whatever it takes, protect your child in that situation. So
Yeah, there are always caveats, right? Like we can go down the caveat trail, and I'm with you on that. Um, and those are really special circumstances, but these are situations that are exceptional, right? And not necessarily exceptional in a positive way.
right. So okay, so let's talk about 3 or 4 specific instances that we've got dozens and dozens and dozens of situations where the IHE has stepped out, worked with potential employers or education institutions to help.
Sure.
So let's go back to 2018, which Kylene, you were not on the government affairs team really at this time, but you were a
No,
newer,
not at all.
not at all. So, but you were, you know the case, you know the case.
I do. I do.
So, okay. So, around 2016, 2017, heading into 2018, we were being contacted by a handful of people who had been applying to the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department. And
Mhm.
the IMPD had an internal policy that they did not accept homeschool diplomas. And several people would apply, run into that roadblock, reach out to us, but decide to walk away. Because if there's one
Mhm.
profession where you probably don't want to make a stink before to get hired,
Right.
it's the police
Right.
department. So no one really wanted us to work directly with the IMPD once they kind of dug into it. They just went elsewhere, found employment someplace else. And even so, we were aware of it. We were not in the position to do anything about it for the first couple of people who reached out to us. That was,
Mhm.
we respect your right to privacy. If you're going to reach out to us, we're going to help you. We're going to have the conversation. We would never contact a potential employer without permission.
Correct. Correct.
So,
Number one, we don't have that kind of time, right? We don't have the time to sit around and go through every company's hiring practices. And if you come to us with the issue, just like Tara said, we will not reach out unless you say, I want you to do this.
Right. So eventually, many of the people that had worked with us, again, decided to go someplace else. But we had one young man who, after finding employment someplace else, was willing to still at least have us be a part of the conversation with the IMPD, because he not only was, let me get this right, he had a homeschool high school diploma, he had a college degree, and he had military experience.
Yes, ma'am. And what's really funny is his college degree was in criminal justice.
Yes.
And it was from an Indiana school. It was from Ball State University. Ball State was like, yay, homeschool grad, come on. They award him his 4-year degree in criminal justice. He goes on to serve in the military, and IMPD says, nope, sorry.
Right. So they basically, and again, he went elsewhere, but he was willing to have this sit down with us and our team. And so thank you to Rob Beiswinger, who was part of our team at the time, who had that meeting. And they reviewed their policy. It took some time. And again, there was no job candidate at that time. This was really just a chance for them to look at their own internal policy. And let's be clear, they have the right, employers have the right to set an internal policy. So they did revisit their policy and they made a change.
They did. And I think that situations like that they're really the win, right? It's a win for the employer. It's a win for the candidate. And that's really what we want. We want employers to understand that homeschoolers really are quality candidates. And when you put these arbitrary measurements in place, that it has to be a state awarded diploma, whether that's from an accredited school or whether it is the HSE, because that's also state awarded, you're missing out on a large pool of really great applicants. And can I say that every student from every educational background is a great candidate? No, I cannot say that. That would be incredibly arrogant of me, right? But what I can say is that when an employer removes an entire group of applicants, it's really the employer that's missing out.
Absolutely. So let's go back. Let's talk about a few other cases. So one of the things that we find, we talked about this already a little bit, was when a homeschool graduate moves out of state. I'm specifically thinking about a family. They homeschooled here in Indiana. They moved to Florida. And now you have this young lady who was applying to, it was an EMT school, correct? And they didn't know how to look at an Indiana homeschool diploma because they're in Florida. So we worked with them on that.
Yeah, we did. And, again, we mentioned earlier that a lot of colleges, universities, programs, they just don't understand laws outside of their own state. And it's really important, especially when we're talking about employers, that our listeners understand that a lot of times companies and programs like these EMS programs, that they don't do their own applicant research. They actually hire that out to a third party that, again, is not familiar with Indiana homeschool law. It's just a third party agency. They're just going through, checking the boxes. And when that agency isn't able to go to the state and verify that the child has a state awarded diploma, they automatically ding the candidate, and the resume or the application essentially goes in the trash. That's what we would say in the HR world, is that the application just goes straight off the desk and into the trash can. And so we had that situation in Florida. And thankfully, we were able to connect with the EMS program and say, hey, listen, we understand you guys are using a third-party verification group. Unfortunately, that group doesn't understand Indiana. Here is the Indiana law. And I want to be clear, that happens in state as well as out of state. I've worked with fire departments who deal with the same thing here in the state of Indiana, and explaining to them that their third-party grouping, who they use as their HR hiring or, application sorting process, that, again, they're losing quality candidates simply because they're not familiar with Indiana law. And they're asking for something that literally does not exist. There's no way for anyone in the state other than the parent, the administrator of the homeschool, to verify what that student has done.
Right. So very helpful. And again, these are cases where we don't go screaming discrimination.
Right. No,
Discrimination.
right.
Call the lawyers. No, we don't need to call a lawyer. Like we can have a conversation, and it is
Yes.
pretty much, it is usually resolved. Now, you did have a situation where a student went to Ohio.
Mhm.
That one, I don't think we got resolved, but it does
We
have.
did actually.
Okay,
We
good.
did.
My
It took,
memory
yeah,
got
we
a little
did.
fuzzy.
No, I'm really glad about this because, we often say that within 24 hours we can get a situation resolved. Sometimes it does take a little bit longer. With the situation in Ohio, it was a beauty college. And again, they were looking for verification of the student's diploma. And again, Ohio has different regulations than what Indiana has. And so it did take a few days, but I'm very glad to say that we were able to talk to the person running the beauty school program and to explain to them Indiana law. And there was some confusion back and forth because the person continued to state, well, as long as you can verify the diploma. And I had to keep saying, I'm sorry, we cannot do that. In Indiana, parents have retained the right to educate their children free of the state. And so there's no way for any agency or organization to verify that. It has to come from the parent. And they would say, yeah, but I noticed that the parent's address and the address of the issuing diploma school are the same, and we can't have that. And so again, we would have to explain in Indiana, parents operate homeschools. And, I would say 99.99% of the time, the parent is going to give their home address as the address of the school.
Right.
I think in very rare instances, you might use a PO box. I don't know why you would do that and continue to pay for the PO box unless you have one for your own personal mail. It just seems like an added extra expense that you don't need. But the majority of the time, those two addresses are going to be the same. And so that looks suspicious to schools and employers.
Right.
So just constantly working on that education piece. And I'm so thankful that that issue was resolved. However, we know that within the cosmetology industry nationwide, there is a massive issue with cosmetology schools refusing homeschool diplomas. And unfortunately, we've dealt with that. We've had two cases just in the last 2 weeks. They were less than 7 days apart from one another, where PJ's Beauty College came and said, your homeschool diploma isn't valid. And so I went and I talked with PJ's several times, phone conversations. And when I looked at their own website, they said that you had to have an accredited diploma or a GED to apply to their school. But when I talked with the directors of the local programs, they told me that they could accept a homeschool student if one of two conditions has been satisfied. Number one, they have a letter from their local public school stating that the homeschooler attended an approved homeschool program that the local public school supplied, or verification from the homeschool association stating that the child had attended an approved homeschool program. So when I listened to this, I said, first of all, it's against state code for a public school to promote curriculum or content outside of what it's teaching. So if a student came to you with a letter from their local public school, that student was not homeschooled. They attended a virtual public school, distance learning that the school offers, whatever that looks like, but they were not in a non-accredited, non-public, less than one employee school. They were not. The second one, again, I've already mentioned this, but there is no way for a homeschool association, meaning the IAHE, to verify what a parent has done in their home school. Now, could we say, in all sincerity, could a parent give us their transcripts? Could they say, here's what we use, here's a copy of my kid's diploma? They could do that. But then it becomes commonplace that the homeschool association has to verify that this child has in fact gone through an accredited program when we haven't been a part of that. We've not been in the parents' homeschool watching the day in and the day out. It's wrong of us to do that. And so we push back and we say, no, these things are not required. Then the feedback becomes, well, homeschool students don't apply for federal student aid. They're not qualified for it. And so we can't take them because we take federal student aid, to which again, I provide the documentation that says, no, here's the information from FAFSA themselves. Homeschoolers can in fact qualify and do qualify for federal student aids. Our kids are doctors, they're lawyers, they're engineers. Come on, they go to college and they use FAFSA for it. They apply through the FAFSA. So I want to make sure that I'm really clear on this. We reached out to PJ Beauty College several times, trying to work with them on this situation. Even before this podcast, we reached out to them and asked them for comment, and we've not received any further communication from them. I do think it's interesting that we do have an Indiana state legislator who is a homeschool graduate, who is writing legislation and getting legislation passed to assist the cosmetology industry in apprenticeships and things like that. And so it's interesting to me that the cosmetology industry will accept that and the legislators help in that regard, but that they will not accept homeschool students into their programs. That is really ironic to me.
It really is. And it's one of those things that, we know that the beauty industry, beauty college industry, I guess we'll call it that, it's notorious for not accepting homeschool diplomas. But I do want to say, not every beauty college or program has that policy.
Correct.
So let's give credit where credit is due, and that we're not familiar with every college, but you do know that there are some that are willing and happy to accept.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have barber schools that are willing and happy to accept homeschool students, Avita, and then also Paul Mitchell, again, very welcoming of homeschool students. And we're really grateful to those specific institutions for understanding the sovereignty and authority of a homeschooling parent to say, my child has qualified to graduate from my program. Or even, we might have some high school students in certain situations that go into one of those programs, and that they trust the parent, that the parent is giving good and accurate information, that their student is where they are in their education and that they are ready for this next step in their adult life, really.
So we're not done having that conversation.
No, we are not.
We're not having these conversations. We know we'll continue to have them, and new ones will crop up. And that's what we do. And we're here for families. So I want to point out a couple of resources and links that we're going to drop for you guys. So if you go to our website, we do have articles on issuing a homeschool diploma, simplified version, I guess, of our conversation here today, because it really should be that simple. Parents issue diploma. We didn't really talk about transcripts, but I want to mention them because usually the two do go hand in hand. So we do have transcript services that you can access on our website. And I want to point out, not only is it a great way to work on your child's transcript at graduation time, it is one of those things when we talked about being a good steward of your child's records. They keep the transcripts, and this company will send them on year after year later after you graduated.
Absolutely.
So, great resource. But we had a podcast talking about transgressions with Shelley Dobb from Cedarville. So if you're in this high school space, definitely go back and make sure you catch that episode as well. So we do want to make this final point about the history of diploma legislation that we've seen over the years, the pros and the cons. This is one of the conversations that we internally as a team have every single year about whether or not current definitions and current legislations are best for where we are now. And I meet with, our HSLDA attorney every single year. This is one of the first questions I ask.
It is.
Is this still working for us? And the answer I usually get is IAHE knows the landscape in Indiana. It's really, you guys know the legislators, and it can change every year. We know it can change every year. Conversation that we have every year. So let's talk about just the past couple years and the pros and the cons, Kylene.
Sure. So I just want to echo what you've said, that first and foremost, this is a conversation that we as an organization, both IAHE and IAHE Action, have every year. Action is our 501c4. And so Action is the one talking with the legislators and saying, hey guys, let's have a conversation. And it really is a conversation that we have regularly. And the answer that we get is really in question form. It's kind of a Socratic dialogue, if you will, of we are always concerned about the unintended consequences. That's our view. That is the legislature view as well. What are the unintended consequences? And sometimes we have really well-meaning legislators who want to assist. They understand what's going on. They hear us talk about diploma discrimination, these issues that our homeschoolers are having when they leave the state. And then other times we do have an attempt to want to control the homeschoolers and get into that space. And so when we have those conversations, it is always, is what we have now doing its job? That is always the question that comes back. And the answer is by and large, yes. So I know we've talked about some cases that feel a little hairy, but really those cases are the minority. I know it doesn't sound like it, but simply because we have highlighted those cases today. But those cases really are the minority of what we're dealing with. And even HSLDA will tell you that the majority of cases they deal with, it is not diploma discrimination.
Right.
It is really withdrawing a child from the local public school. That is the majority of what they deal with. It's the majority of what we deal with. And so we always have to ask ourselves, what are the unintended consequences? You know, one of the things we do not want to see as the IAHE, we do not want to see further regulation on homeschoolers. So we do not ask the state, would you please state that our children are receiving a state accredited diploma? We're not going to ask for that. Instead, what we would say is, would you please utilize code that states that diplomas from non-accredited, non-public schools are legal in the state of Indiana? We're not asking for the state to rubber stamp it. We're just simply asking for a code that says we're legal. We did have a legislator who brought that forward a few times, I believe 3 times, in fact. And one of the last situations became embroiled with a major state university that somehow believed that the language stated they would have to accept an Indiana homeschooling student. That's not what the language said, but that is what that university's lobbyist continued to push. And so, unfortunately, the legislature decided to pull that bill and to not hear it further. But I do want our homeschoolers to understand that it is something that we do consider every single year to assist with situations like that, you know, where we've got the discrimination happening. Now, if we get a diploma bill that says that, then the question becomes, do we also have to now introduce language that defines a homeschool so that then we can point to the diploma bill and say, see, my homeschool is legal and my homeschool diploma is legal? There are these cascading effects that sometimes we don't see. And so these are things that we as an organization and our sister organization Action, that we are constantly weighing, constantly.
And it is important to say that, you know, legislation can be good, it can be bad. And if it's poorly written,
Yes.
right? And so it's really
Yes.
careful. Little bitty words matter. And, you know, we want to give credit to, again, our friend, Representative Wesco, who we mentioned
Yes.
is a part of helping the cosmetology industry with some of their licensing. He has put forward some bills over, you know, the past handful of years. And it's a good conversation to have.
Yes.
The bills really have not seen the light of day. You know, we did testify. We had to get some rewritten because it was filed before we actually had a chance to give input at one point. That's okay. We appreciate Representative Wesco's efforts.
100%.
Homeschool
Yes.
graduate and a homeschool dad.
Yes.
But right now, when we've looked at it and when we talk to legislators and when we've seen the conversations that happened during these bills being put forward, it really just makes you say there would be far more unintended negative consequences.
Yes.
So
yes.
Yeah.
And can I just add really quickly, it sounds really easy to say legislation was put forward. It's really easy to say that. But what we have to acknowledge is that every piece of legislation goes through committee. It receives 3 hearings, and then it swaps and goes into the opposite chamber, right? So if the legislation originates in the House, it's going to get a first reading, it's going to get assigned to committee. The committee can make amendments to that piece of legislation, then it goes back, then it's going to go to the Senate. And so, it's really important to note that we might put forward legislation that says one thing, but when it comes out of the legislature, it could say something completely different and add additional regulation. So these are also things that we really have got to measure closely.
So we'll wrap it up here. I want to give you one image that was always very powerful to me attending my first conferences as a homeschool parent, learning all of this, trying to take it all in. And Senator Dennis Cruz, who served as the chairman of the Education Committee for a long time, would occasionally get to stand on our stage and address attendees before a keynote. And he came in, he had 5 minutes or so. He didn't have a lot of time. And legislators love to share and love to talk. But the most powerful thing he did was he brought with him a printed copy of the Education Code. And that is one thick book. It's a beast. And what he said was, stay out of it. Do everything you can to stay out of code. That is the safest position to be. So that was always a very powerful image for me. So to those of you, that is really what guides us. Stay out of code. We are free. We want to remain free, but we're very careful, and we know that things could change. So it's a conversation
Absolutely.
we have. Well, thank you, Kylene. I know it's been a long episode here for everybody. I hope you stuck with us to the end, but it's an important conversation. So check out the links. Make sure you are paying attention to both IAHE and IAHE Action. Doing important work here. And Kylene, you are doing important work that most people will never know about. So anytime we can shine a light on it, I'm happy to.
Well, I really appreciate that. And I just want to say, I know that we're both with IAHE and Action, and I just want to say to our parents, it really is the pleasure of the IAHE and IAHE Action to serve homeschooling families here in our state. And it is our desire to assist you in any way that we can. So if you need something, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Again, keep in mind, I'm a homeschooling mom. Also, Tara is a super busy executive director. So know that we want to hear from you, and we do want to assist you. Thanks so much for hanging in today, guys.
Thank you, everyone. And if you are someone who wants to be in the fight with us, make sure you also check out our volunteer page, and we will see you next time.
See ya.